That's how I feel.
All right, here we go. We're live. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is Project SIP's 9th podcast on August 6, 2020. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'll be your host tonight, Alex Reed. Want to start off the podcast by introducing our two newest members here. The first is Stasia. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I am Stasia. I am a trust and estates attorney here in Sacramento. Politically, I would say I'm libertarian leaning and more issue-based than party-based.
What was it you called yourself before we went live?
I just found out that this was based on a test on the internet, so take that with a grain of salt.
Fine, fair enough.
What was it? Libertarian socialist.
There it is, libertarian socialist. First time I've ever heard that. So
me too.
Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. The other newbie to the podcast today is Jordan Rittett. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Jordan.
Hey, so as you mentioned, my name is Jordan. I am a native of Marin County, and I am in cash management for a financial services company. And as far as my political leanings, definitely hard left with some libertarian leanings.
Great, fantastic. Thank you guys both for joining us here. So to get right into it, obviously, as you guys can see, we've got less people than we have on the last few podcasts. Wanted to do that as a decision more to give everybody on the podcast a little bit more talking time. You know, one of the main complaints we got is that there's too much talking over each other, not enough time for like everybody to kind of speak their piece throughout the podcast. So we felt like, hey, let's reduce it down. Let's have a more intimate discussion. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to see how it works. And hopefully you guys in the comments, let us know what you think. So jumping right into the first topic of the night, we are going to talk about increasing socioeconomic inequality. And I want to go right out the gate to Jordan here. I'm going to throw you right to the fire here, buddy. So I want to ask you, Jordan, what do you feel like are the main contributing factors to socioeconomic inequality in this country? And what are some possible solutions?
Well, I would say that mainly the wage gap between CEOs and their workers is one of the huge issues in regards to our equality economically. I mean, when you have people like Bezos making, I don't know the exact figure per minute, but it's some ludicrous sum compared to, you know, their severely underpaid warehouse workers who are in conditions that are reportedly extremely bad. The issue, I think, is exploitation more than anything, because that's really what it boils down to. When it comes to solving it, I believe that taxing on the hyper rich, and I'm talking the 1%, not talking if you have $200,000 in the bank, that, you know, you're not included in that statement. But taxing of the hyper rich, along with other systemic changes in regards to regulating certain industries, is going to help the overall economic inequality of, you know, that we're seeing right now. Sorry, you threw me to the fire. I did not expect that.
I'm just checking to see if you're prepared here. This is your first podcast, and what better way to do it than jumping right in there? So
fair enough. I was expecting to be able to bounce off of somebody and not have to lay everything down, but thank you.
No, that's not how it works here. So, Stasia, I want to go to you next as the other newbie. I'm going to throw you to the fire as well. What do you think of what Jordan just said?
I liked it, actually. I thought I got scared that you were going to throw me to it, so I was happy with that. But so when you say the super rich, I think I have a question on where is that threshold for you? What you know, estate amount would you consider a super rich income, or an estate tax, or, you know, capital gains?
Yeah, so you know, I guess for the sake of this argument, you know, I know one of the proposals that Bernie Sanders had put out was or maybe it was Bernie Sanders or AOC, I can't remember, but they put out a proposal where they would tax anyone making over 10 million at like 70% of a marginal tax rate. So let's use 10 million as an example.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with that. I think I like that the super rich really is a super rich, because, you know, coming from my work perspective is I have a lot of clients who are farm owners. And while they may have a $5 million estate, it's all in the farm. And so if you end up with an estate tax on that, it can really mess up operations and endanger, something that's been there for 100 years, because they now need to liquidate to make capital, to pay the estate tax, etc. So I think that the threshold does need to be high and take into consideration that not everybody has the liquidity.
Sure. Now that makes a lot of sense. So I guess as a follow-up question to that, since I know that I think we've talked before and you've told me that this is kind of more or less your area of expertise. How much of what you see or what people do you see the most affected by the estate tax? Is it actually the super rich, or is it the farmers that you just described?
So, I mean, honestly, well, here's the thing. The super rich have the money to pay a really good attorney to do a trust that avoids the tax.
Right.
So to be honest, I would say if I had to guess, I would think that it is more detrimental to those mid-size. And I realize that $5 million is not really mid-size, but for a farm, it kind of is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that standard needs to be high to take into account that and to, reward that work, because that is a really big deal in America. Right.
Okay. Fair point. Amanda, you wanted to jump in real quick. 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Stasia, you mentioned farms, and you also kind of mentioned the estate tax, and I kind of did a little homework. And so as of 2017, there were only 80 farms and businesses that were facing the estate tax. That's not like 80%. It was just 80 farms that had taxable estates.
Well, I've got 3 of them.
I know. I'm just mentioning, so just the viewers.
And is that in the state? That's the federal. Does that include the people that are subject to their local state estate tax?
It probably doesn't, because this is probably federal what I looked up. But 3 years ago,
and that's because in 2017. Yeah. Sorry, I know I'm interrupting you. I'm terrible.
Okay.
In 2017, the estate tax was 5.5 million, give or take 10 grand. Now it's 11.8. It's huge, and so I definitely think that needs to come down.
Oh, and my data was from the Tax Policy Center. That's where it was from.
So Amanda, it sounded like what you were trying to say was that you feel like the farm client example is kind of a smaller example of those affected by the estate tax. Is that correct? Or
yes, but I think obviously Stasia deals with those groups in particular.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, one thing I would also say,
it makes sense that you would have 3 of them then. So
that's right.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I mean, this is Northern California.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Interesting point there. I want to go.
Know what the estate tax is?
What's that?
Yeah.
Sorry. Does everyone know what the estate tax is?
$11.8 million.
Well, no, like what it is.
It's like 40%. I want to of the taxable amount.
So real quick, actually, Stasia, since you deal directly in this, why don't you give our viewers a quick outline of what the estate tax actually does and what it's aimed at doing, and then I want to go to Vlad next.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, conceptually, it really was designed to distribute closely held property and redistribute wealth upon the death of a rich person. So the way it works is there's an exemption amount. So right now it's $11.8 million per person. So if I have $12 million, when I die, as long as I haven't given any pre-death taxable gifts or, all these other exceptions, $200,000 would be taxed by the federal government at a rate of 40%. And so there are various ways in estate planning and tax planning to get around that. But it's and then historically, so I'm looking at in 97, it was 600,000. In 2007, it was 2 million. In 2017, it was 5.5 million. And then with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it went up to 11 million.
Right. So basically, it decreases the amount of people that would be subject to the estate tax. Is the goal.
Correct.
So
Correct.
yeah. Okay.
And like some people call it a death tax, some people call it an inheritance tax.
Yep.
Well,
It's
there's
very-
a difference. No,
Yeah.
an inheritance
There
tax
is?
is
Oh,
tax
okay.
to the recipient.
Really
Got it.
quick, and then I
Okay.
want to go to Vlad. So
Anyways,
is
I
that
think
it?
we got it.
That was it. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Great.
It's
I want
not
to.
often that I get to correct Amanda.
It's okay.
It's not often that anyone gets to correct Amanda. Let's be honest. Cool. Thank you for that. Appreciate the definition there. I'm sure that cleared it up for a couple people. Let's go to Vlad next. Vlad, what do you think are some solutions to slimming down the gap between the ultra rich and the middle class?
Yeah, so one statistic that I found actually, and this is something that I found incredibly interesting, is according to the Economic Policy Institute, if you look at salaries from, they had a study that went from 1978 through, I believe, 2012 or 2014. I don't recall the exact time when their data ended. CEO compensation grew 940%. And in the same time, average worker pay grew, give or take 12%, if you adjust for inflation and do various things like that. So I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have. But what do you think are some solutions to average worker pay?
I think that was our stream on delay right there.
I'm
sorry, Vlad. Go ahead.
That, Alex. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I actually do agree with Jordan. I think there needs to be some form of regulation. There needs to be some form of, dare I say, and accuse me of being communist or socialist or whatever, some form of wealth redistribution going from the top down for a change. I think that the marginal tax rate on the top 1% does need to go up, and I would agree with the proposal by Bernie Sanders that it should be at if you make anything over 10 million, it should be taxed considerably higher. Because let's face it, if you make $10 million a year in actual compensation and you can't survive off that, and you can't feed your family, you can't provide for your family, I'm sorry, there's something wrong with how you're budgeting your money, and what you really need is a good financial advisor and not just more cash. Because that's kind of what's happening. You get articles right now, you get people making $300,000 a year that are bitching and complaining about, I don't have enough money, and then you look at their budgets and it's like, well, you take 5 vacations a year, own 2 homes, and have 3 luxury cars. Like, sorry, I'm not gonna, let me bring out my tiny violin for you.
Sure.
So I believe, there is a solution, and it has to come, really has to come from the bottom up. Like we need to account for the fact that workers, as it stands right now, are the most productive they've ever been. However, wages have not kept up with that level of productivity. At the same time, when you look at minimum wage, for example, it's sitting at, what's the federal level right now? I think
725.
725. Thank you. If you were to tie that to, for instance, the consumer price index, or hell, even to the rate of inflation, minimum wage would be above $20, $20 an hour right now. So there are things like fundamentally broken in the system that I think once we address those issues, this gap will come down, and it has to come down, because the gap has not been this high since the 1920s. And I don't think I need to remind anybody here. I think we've all studied history, and we all know what happened in 1929, and I'd really rather not go through that.
Quick follow-up, Vlad, and that was very well said. So thank you. Quick follow-up question to that. As a means of potentially like slimming the gap between the ultra rich and the middle class, what would be your thoughts on instituting a nationwide form of UBI to at least assist in addressing that those concerns?
I would support it. Honestly, I think I think there are a lot of people in this country who would do a lot of who that any amount of money extra per month would be life changing.
Right.
And I really don't believe that you can I personally don't believe in supply side economics. I don't think it's ever worked. I don't think it will ever work. I think it's a pipe dream sold by, a bunch of rich people to entice the rest of the world into giving them more money. It hasn't worked. It won't work. It has to come from the bottom up. And that's one way to do it is through some sort of UBI, through some sort of like top down redistribution of wealth instead of the bottom up redistribution that we've been doing in this country since Ronald Reagan.
Very well said. Robert, do you agree with that? Do you think there is a form of supply side economics that can work in this country?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't think that, what I was going to say was I do agree with a UBI, but I just feel like every time there's some kind of economic problem, we always talk about taxing the ultra rich. And I think it gets to a certain point where if we're using that for everything, it starts to get to a point, well, how much are they going to end up getting taxed in the end if they are having to pay for green energy, pay for the lower skilled workers, pay for minimum wage or healthcare for all. So I think that there's some questions that have to be had on how would we implement these type of things. But I do think that there is a definite problem with CEOs making, I think it's like 1,900 times of what the minimum wage worker makes for their company. So there are different problems, and there are ways about doing that. But I wouldn't say that taxing the rich would be the solvent for all of these problems.
So can I ask a follow-up question, Robert? Yeah. Do you think that, because I know like one of the problems that people mention a lot when it comes to supply side economics is the fact that the ultra rich get a tax cut. And, for in a perfect world, that money is supposed to trickle down to the workers, investment and reinvestment into the company and stuff like that. Do you think that the largest companies in this country should have to meet certain objectives before they're able to buy back their own stocks, such as hitting a certain wage with their employees or reinvesting a certain amount in the company? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, if that's what has to happen, I think the main problem is that most of these major corporations go and lobby for Congress, like Jeff Bezos. Amazon not receiving, having to pay any tax. I think that those are real problems. But that sounds like a solution. I mean, I haven't really looked into it all that much, but I agree that there's a problem with CEOs, and I agree that a lot of them can be greedy. I think that pet statutes and lobbying for their corporation is a major problem.
So Vlad had a quick question for you, Robert. Go ahead, Vlad.
Yeah, Robert, I know you had mentioned that, it seems like the solution whenever there's any sort of problem is to tax try to tax the wealthy. And yes, I do see your point in that. That has been kind of the solution proposed by people on my side of the aisle for a number of years. However, my question is, why is it that every time there is a Republican controlled legislature, Republican controlled presidency, there is such a huge push to give tax breaks to those same people, to give them even more money, and to give corporate interests more money consistently, when we know it's been proven that they won't turn around and give that money to their employers. I mean, I think the point was made on an earlier broadcast that a lot of companies who got the tax cut in 2017 used that on stock buybacks, and there was actually layoffs afterwards. So I'm just curious, like, at what point do we stop giving the wealthy more money and admit that maybe it's not working?
I 100% agree with you. Republicans are just as big a corporatist as Democrats are. So I'm not going to sit here and defend Republicans on being for the working class. I think for a long time in our government, Republicans were more, country club Republicans, where you had the Bushes, where they were just as corporatist as Democrats were. So I agree with you 100% that Republicans are just as guilty as Democrats.
Yep.
I think that the main problem is we say talking about taxing the 1%. And I feel like to pay for a lot of these things, it wouldn't just have to be the 1%. It would have to be stuff that would, like I'll use this for an example. When they talk about Medicare for all, it isn't just the 1% that would have to be taxed for that. That's something like even the middle class would taxes have to be raised. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily a problem, but when we talk about, implementing other solutions for, Green New Deal or whatever, I start to worry that, like the middle class is going to have their marginal tax rate at 60%. After we implement all these other type of ideas along with Medicare for all. But I'm not here to defend Republicans. They're just as guilty as Democrats are.
For sure.
and,
Vlad, quick response, and then we got to move on.
Yeah, Robert, I just had a quick response to your Medicare for all comment, and I do agree with you. I think there will have to be some form of tax on everyone. That it's not going to be just a 1% issue. However, when you look at the amount of money that corporations pay for their employees' health benefits right now, so I know personally, I think my company pays in the neighborhood of $12,000 a year for my healthcare alone. If they were to give that money instead of paying it to, Blue Shield or Aetna or whoever the hell they pay it to, if they were instead to give it to me, and then the government would take, let's say, $4,000 out of that 12 as a tax, all in all, I'd actually be okay with that, because then there'd be a nationwide healthcare system that anybody can benefit from, and I would also get a pay raise out of them. So I think if you look at it, as a tax added on top of what you're already paying, yeah, it sucks. But when you take into consideration the amount of money that we're paying for private insurance and kind of do the numbers that way, it actually could work, and it could be not only a societal benefit, but a financial benefit to a lot of people.
That sounds like a good debate we can have for another session, because that's
Agreed.
another thing. I'd like that, but I appreciate your opinion, and
Yep.
I look forward to that debate.
Man, I love that. Kumbaya.
Thank you, Robert.
Let's go on over to Jake real quick. You haven't spoken yet. Jake, what do you got, man?
So in large, I wanted to agree with Jordan and Vlad in their assessment that CEO to worker wage gap was one of the bigger problems, and suggest some simple things that we could do. Tie them percentage wise to their lowest employees. You can't have more than X percentage. Even if it was 2 to 5 times, it's still nowhere near as bad as it is now. And if you did that, it would force them to generally increase the well-being of their workers in order to increase their own. That's just good planning. But that's short term, and what we're looking at is a problem that is there's a much bigger looming issue just behind it, and that's automation is going to be a huge problem for a ton of people who will suddenly have no job while the job is still getting done. And I think that we can not face that right now, because that is its own thing. But I bring it up to speak to the idea that UBI is something we really should be looking at, whether it's true UBI, universal for everybody, or some variant thereof. I think that when automation I mean, it's an information technology. It's increasing at an exponential rate. So when automation takes over in a more aggressive way, which it will in the next couple of years, we'll start needing to have a discussion about UBI. And the more we understand it, and the better we jump on that now, I think the better we'll do in that transition, so that the CEOs don't end up with absolutely everything. That's all I got.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jake. Jordan, you wanted to respond to something Robert said.
Yeah, and I just want to say I largely agree with what he said. However, even if large companies are taxed at like say 60%, I mean 60% of $1 billion, you still have $400 million left. I mean, I don't see that as anything but a completely morally objectionable amount of money for a single person to have, especially if they're not contributing to society. That being said, if you want to avoid being taxed on income, every business has the option to invest in their own company to avoid taxes. That is all tax deductible, yet they don't do it. Why? Because they want to pocket it. And it's really just driven in greed. And the only way to stop this from happening is to put these hard set rules in place, because you cannot trust human nature.
Quick follow-up. Actually, Robert, do you want to respond to that real quick, or?
I mean, I don't really have any objection to it. I think that one thing that I do think about, not necessarily a response to that, but when we talk about ideas like increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour, you know, there's economists that come out and say that from the $15 an hour wage boost, that the economy would lose, I think it's something like 1.3 million jobs. So I wonder, you know, there's a cost benefit of increasing the minimum wage. And I just wonder, you know, how important is it for, you know, $15 minimum wage when we'll lose 1.3 million workers in the process of doing so?
But the problem with that is that these jobs that will be lost are based on exploitation. And if a job is based on exploitation, it shouldn't exist, because that's essentially a modern form of slavery.
But
so
how are they being?
You realize that how many Walmart workers are on welfare?
Mm-hmm.
That's the example. That's one of the examples of how this kind of plays out. Those jobs, I believe they deserve to exist. But the company, if they're doing that and paying their workers a starvation wage, that's unacceptable, and they should not be allowed to operate in that fashion in the U.S.
Yeah,
full agreement.
Walton family is pretty greedy.
Oh yeah, no argument there.
Can I just jump in really quick?
Yeah.
One thing, and I think you guys are, from the way that this discussion is going, is that this is really focused on big corporations, Fortune 500 companies. But I do just want to point out that while I agree with that, I don't necessarily want a minimum wage to be universal, because of the issue and the burden that would place on small businesses. And, you know, I think there's a consideration to be made for that.
I can agree with that.
I would think that they should do something like a national minimum wage that's affected by a local percentage to vary it to whatever, because, you know, so that Jacksonville doesn't have like a $15 minimum wage and otherwise a super low other economic value.
Yeah, like scaled to the cost of living.
I think
but based off of a national something
is a great idea, but kind of, you know, a national idea and a national goal, but implement it maybe even in different ways locally.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with a county-based system personally.
Understood.
Especially because like a minimum wage in San
the
Francisco
one
won't
thing I
cut it
would,
in
Yeah.
Modesto.
Exactly.
I would say that would just be like another thing to be politicized, though. You know, frankly, like I think
everything is.
Yeah,
We'll get to that.
but that's a conversation for another day.
Or the same day, just later.
Later on today.
Or the same, or it could be. I mean, maybe we'll get to it later tonight. One thing I did, Kylan, you wanted to address a comment in our comment section tonight. I'm going to give you that opportunity. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Charles brought up, his question was, you know, what are our thoughts about the government keeps subsidizing corporations? And so I wanted to address that. I mean, if you look down the line at what's going on, we subsidize big pharmaceutical companies, we subsidize big oil, we subsidize big agriculture, we subsidize the military industrial complex. And so this is all a form of corporate socialism that's very expensive. And so, you know, my thoughts are is that we need to stop subsidizing large multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporations, and we need to start finding ways to reinvest those monies into the American people. That could be in the form of additional tax breaks and tax credits. That could be in the form of looking at, you know, universal basic income, or that could be, you know, look at reinvesting into, you know, national infrastructure such as broadband, such as technology, such as roads and bridges. But to Charles's point, I think we're far past time to be subsidizing to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars to corporations that literally pay an effective tax rate of 0, and in most cases actually get tax rebates.
Amen to that.
Perfect response.
Yeah.
By the way, Kylan, we've all been seeing some lightning in the background there. I hope you're staying safe, man.
Yeah, there's some gnarly lightning that's been going on. We got flash flood warning. So yeah, it's pretty gnarly out here in Virginia.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Kylan is taking a little vacation out there, so he's off site for today, but wanted to join us anyway, and we appreciate you being a part of the broadcast today, Kylan. So thanks for coming.
Great being here. I love you
guys. Love you too, buddy. Let's go over to Jules next. Jules over there, Hasselhoffing it with his red shirt there. What do you got to say, buddy?
Hey, so I wanted to just put some numbers onto it because I think it's important to see exactly what the disparity is, especially concerning CEO pay versus average worker pay and things like that, and how it's changed over time. So I think, so if you look at the numbers, let's see, just had it highlighted, okay. So CEO to typical worker compensation ratio was 20 to 1 in 1965 and 58 to 1 in 1989. CEOs are making a lot more now. It's raised about 1,000%, and the disparity has risen at the same amount. So now we're looking at huge amounts of wealth going to the upper echelon, and the workers' pay being relatively stagnant, especially since the 1970s, 1980s, when it's really stagnated. So I think it's important to look at that in terms of taxable income, in that there shouldn't be that disparity. And the amount of money that they are amassing in should be taxed, because if they're going to work off of the laws that the United States puts forth, and they're going to make the money off of the backs of these people, it's important for them to give back to the society. They don't need $1 trillion, because Jeff Bezos is now estimated to be on his way to being the first trillionaire of America. That disparity has to change. That cannot continue, and us have a fair society. They will always win 100% of the time, because they can throw any amount of money at anything they do and get their way. If we want any sort of income equality, the amount of money that CEOs are making in comparison to the average worker has to narrow somewhat. I mean, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be making more money, but they shouldn't be making 1,000% more. I think that's pretty outrageous.
Jules, how do you begin to address those issues? What are some steps that you think we could take as a nation to address those issues that you just described?
Well, I think we need to close loopholes in corporate taxation. Amazon, of course, is very, very commonly known now to have paid nothing in taxes, and they're
1.2% last
countries.
Mm-hmm. Oh, nothing.
Mm-hmm. So next to nothing.
Literally next to nothing.
Compared to their net worth. That's ridiculous. I mean, they are an American company. They should be paying a fair amount of taxes. They have the capital. It's not going to hurt them to pay those taxes. So all it really comes down to is that it's corporate greed. They found some, legal loopholes in the tax codes. They have offshore accounts. They probably have offshore subsidiaries that they're operating out of in order to avoid getting taxed, and that those loopholes need to close. The individuals at the top could stand to take a pay cut. I mean, if that was voluntary, that would be great, and distribute what they'd be paid back through the company to their workers, to the people who actually make their company operate. I think things like that. I think changing the tax code to increase income tax on the wealthiest Americans is definitely an angle that we should work. I think it should definitely be incremental. I don't think we should be putting undue burden on the middle class, on the lower class. But right now, in many situations, the lowest class is paying the highest amount of taxes compared to the upper class, who can afford to pay for offshore accounts, can afford to create fake LLCs offshores.
And Jules, to that point, Charles McConnor says in the chat, they make even more from the stock dividend too, which is a very good point.
That is a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that response, Jules. Those were all very good points, as I like to say. And then next, I want to go quickly to Amanda. You had a quick response to this, and then I have an off-topic question for you. So go ahead.
Well, it wasn't really a response to Jules specifically. I think we had a Facebook comment from William Adams about if there's another full shutdown from the coronavirus causing an economic shutdown, the world's economy will spiral down the drain, causing inflation on everything, increasing and inflating the costs on essential products. I would agree with respect to the United States. I don't think that is going to affect the world that broadly, because a lot of other countries properly support small businesses. They properly support their populations, whether it is Medicare for all or the countries that are giving monthly just automatic pandemic income to people and to businesses to subsidize them so they can pay their employees even if the businesses are shut down. A lot of other countries, especially in Europe, while they may have had a negative impact on their economies, it was nowhere near to the degree that it has been in the United States.
That's exactly right.
So I don't think it's going to be a worldwide big thing unless we view the United States as, the center of the universe, which unfortunately a lot of Americans do. And so, I mean, we already have seen certain things go out of stock. There's like yeast. I couldn't find baking soda the other day. Like I just needed it so I could clean some stuff. I didn't need to bake anything. We saw the rush of toilet paper. Like
I will say that
we're already seeing that in our country, but that's because we're not managing this the way that we should, the way that we're not, we're used to leading by example in a lot of areas of the world. And this is one area where we haven't, but I don't think that it's the appropriate generalization to say, well, if there's another full shutdown, everything shuts down because other countries are not doing what we're doing. They're not making the same mistakes we are necessarily. Like some are, but a lot of them aren't.
Yep. And I will say to that same point, one of the things like, my local Safeway, I go there, there's a great supply of toilet paper, hand sanitizer. Eggs was another thing that was really tough to find for a while. And I will say like a lot of that has gotten easier, thank goodness. But I mean, if this gets much worse than it is right now, we could fall back into that again. I wanted to go to a semi-related topic, but in the same kind of like neighborhood of socioeconomic inequality. Amanda, this question's about Social Security. Now, Social Security has been a hot button issue in this country for a while, and there have been calls from Republicans to either cut Social Security or privatize it. Given that Americans are living much longer these days than they used to, do you think cuts to Social Security are needed to keep the program solvent?
So I'm coming from a very layman's perspective on this because I don't deal with that type of issue other than I have lots of clients at my job who are on Social Security. And so I don't think eliminating it is the solution because so many people rely on it. And I'm not even talking about the people, you know, where it's politicized and, oh, you just want your Social Security, you're not going to actually work or anything. I'm talking about people who are disabled, people who are older, people who, you know, they genuinely qualify and they're not taking advantage of the system. Those people need that to not, like, I won't even say get by in America because they still can't get by on that. So I don't think eliminating it is the solution unless you have a replacement that's just as good. Well, I won't even say good because I don't think it's a great program, but that is equal to or better than what we currently have.
Just as a follow-up real quick, you don't think Social Security is a good program?
Not the way it's implemented. I think there could be a lot of improvements. I mean, it's like when you talk about Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, like, yay, step in the right direction, but a lot of room for improvement, a lot of things that could be changed for the betterment of everybody.
So conceptually, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, it's cool. I thought you were stopping.
Finish your point, Amanda, then we'll go quickly to
Okay,
George.
I was going to go to the aspect of privatization. While I, as a public defender and a constitutionalist, don't trust the government, I also don't trust private businesses. And we see what happens with privatized prisons. We see what's happened with privatized healthcare. I don't want Social Security or social benefits to be privatized because we see how corruption and greed affect not just government, but like it's on a way bigger scale when it's privatized, unless you're going to have an extreme amount of regulation, which frankly, a lot of people in this country, regardless of what side of the aisle they fall on, are not going to want. They're not going to want that type of regulation and red tape. So I'm a big fan of trying to make America a little bit more like Europe in a lot of ways. And we got the eating outside part down now. But I mean,
Sorry.
but, I mean, we could do that in a lot of other ways in terms of making society more livable and survivable for vulnerable populations, whether it's, Black, Indigenous, people of color, those communities, or whether it's people who are disabled, people who are older, people who have mental health issues, people who have physical injuries from work, and they can't do the things that they used to do, and they rely on these public benefits. I mean, I had food stamps after law school, and I was an unemployed attorney, and I couldn't get a job because it was difficult to find a job. And it was a short period of time, and it helped me pay my rent and buy my, what was it? Go to the grocery store. It helped me in that short period of time. But the problem is our systems in general are not set up to get people off of that short-term benefit or support. And that's what needs to change.
Kylan, you wanted to respond to a comment that Amanda made about Social Security?
Yeah, I agree and disagree with Amanda's point. I think I know where she's trying to go, but I don't want to assume. So when we talk about it, improving Social Security, so number one big problem why Social Security needs to be improved is because the cap for Social Security as it stands right now is $132,900, which is absolutely preposterous. When you look at some of the high net worth and the millionaires and billionaires, for them to be for the cap to be $132,900 is absolutely ludicrous. And that in itself, by simply either raising the cap or eliminating that cap, the Social Security Trust Fund would be solvent for 2 generations. Number two, if you look at, and Robert, I'm not throwing conservatives under the bus, but when you look at what conservatives usually try to do when they talk about entitlement reform, they try to talk about, they say Social Security is a drain on the deficit, which is not, because the Social Security Trust Fund is entirely from the payroll tax, which is why I believe that conservatives are typically trying to always cut or eliminate the payroll tax cut as a backdoor way to cut Social Security. And so when we talk about improving Social Security and we talk about, raising the retirement rate, I also don't agree with that. It's already as it stands, I believe it's 71 or 72 years old. I mean, what are we looking at? Raising it to 75, 80 years old? Like basically we retire to get full Social Security and then we die 3 years later since the United States life expectancy is going down. And there's a myriad of reasons on that, which I'm not going to get into. But, a lot of the times we talk about entitlements, they're actually not entitlements because we've been paying into Social Security since we've all had our first jobs. We have payroll tax cuts that are taken out of our paycheck every 2 weeks or every week. We have Medicare taxes that are taken out of our paychecks every 2 weeks or every week. So it's not like these are entitlements. We pay into this from our paycheck every time we get paid. But what we need to do is be more efficient and be more structured in how we take these taxes out. So that's my thing. So again, I wasn't trying to disagree with you, but I just want to make sure that, we can try to be on the same page. Whereas, these are some things that I believe that can improve Social Security, but it's not reducing benefits. It's not continuously raising the retirement age. It's not hurting retirees.
I want to give Robert a quick chance to respond to that if you want to, because you were called out directly. Go ahead.
Oh, dang, dude, call me straight out. What the heck?
Call it out, man.
So the problem that I have is that
quick response, by the way, because I want to get Stasia next.
Yeah, Social Security spends more money, or each year it spends more money than it takes in. So I understand that it's impossible for it to actually become solvent. But even if, Congress has stolen money from Social Security every single year, it's still spending more money than it's taking in. So I think that is a problem with the Social Security, and there needs to be some kind of reform with it.
I think raising the cap or eliminating the cap would solve that problem.
Yeah.
And that's where I just think that it's just coming to another problem of, taxing the rich again.
Right. Stasia, I want to go to you. What are your thoughts on Social Security as a whole, to piggyback off of what everyone else has said so far? Do you largely agree, or do you think that it's fine the way it is?
Um,
That was some sort of laugh.
I know that laugh well.
But I also don't think it's impossible to make it work. Really, I agree with the cap. I do think that there maybe should be a cap, but 130 grand is actually pretty low for America. And I do think it would create a lot of funding problems. And then I honestly think we need to look at the bureaucracy side and see how we can just better administer any kind of program like that.
Gotcha. Well said.
I don't know how to do that because that's not my area, but I think it would help.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I think you won't find many disagreements there. So does anyone else have anything to say about Social Security as a whole before we move on?
No,
Okay.
I guess not.
I guess not. So I want to move on to this one quickly. Stasia has to leave at 8 o'clock, so I wanted to get her opinion on this real quick before she leaves. Stasia, can you talk a little bit about the amendment to Prop 13 in California on the November ballot coming up?
So, so I don't, and terribly, I did not do my homework and I didn't actually read the bill. However, I mean, this is definitely coming from a very subjective viewpoint of I represent and know.
So actually, can we start off with this? Can you, just for those of us in the chat and that are watching at home that don't know what Prop 13 is, can you just give us a quick definition about what that amendment is?
Yeah, so it allows the property tax value, so your property tax amount, to continue the same on inherited property given certain conditions. Generally, it is parent to child or grandparent to grandchild transfers.
Okay, perfect. And then
so what it allows people to do is pay very low property taxes on, say, a San Francisco condo that's worth $5 million. They're paying property taxes based on what great grandma paid for it in 1920.
Okay. Interesting.
And what happens, and I think and the amendment is to limit some of those exemptions. So there's $1 million exemption right now, where you could, any value over $1 million is still reassessed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they want to lower that, if I remember correctly. so that more people are taxed. You don't get this real low compressed property taxes. And on one hand, I do think that $1 million, again, when you compare that to the estate tax exemption, it's actually pretty modest. And it really does allow, it's a huge benefit to keeping real property in a family. And I just kind of like it.
So what you're saying is Prop 13, the goal of it seems to be to bring in more tax dollars by raising the exemption with which having a hard time.
So the amendment wants to bring in more tax money.
Gotcha. So it eliminates that exemption basically, and it makes it so the threshold is higher for what you have to pay property taxes on. Am I getting that right?
I think it's lower.
Lower.
So we'll be getting more money from Prop 13 taxes, from property taxes, which I'm almost torn about this, is because property taxes are very often, especially in California, even used to support education. And so I really think that that's a big problem and that should change, but I don't necessarily want to do away with Prop 13.
Oh, that's interesting. I thought that property taxes specifically went to funding schools. You're saying that isn't the case?
No, they do. Generally,
okay.
It's not like a, nationwide thing. They don't always, but very often, yes.
Gotcha. Robert, you wanted to respond to that?
Yeah. So I wanted to, I kind of have I guess this is anecdotal, but my grandpa had bought our property in Marin County in the 50s, and his property tax was about $100. And then once he had passed, I had used his investments to buy out my mom's sister. But since my grandpa was my legal guardian and he wasn't my actual father, I wasn't protected under this. So our property taxes went from $100 a month to I think it was somewhere close to like $700 a month. So what ended up happening was at that time, my family, or I don't know, my mom started getting involved with addiction and started taking loans out to pay these property taxes because we didn't have enough money to pay for it. So in the end, what happened was we ended up losing our house because our property taxes had become so ridiculously high. So I think the problem with this is a lot of the times it seems good because we're taxing these well-off people, and the house was valued at $700,000, but we were a middle-class family, and we didn't have money to pay $600 a month in property taxes, or it was something even higher. I think it was like something like we had to pay $10,000 a year in property taxes, which we couldn't do. So I think that there is a certain aspect on who should pay it, but there is evidence here of how it can hurt a middle-class family.
Yeah. I want to give Stasia a quick opportunity to respond, and then I want to go to Jake.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think how I want to phrase this, but I don't think that's a problem with allowing people to keep their low property tax. I think that what you're actually arguing for is an expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And it might not be just because it's actually, from what you said, it wouldn't be because you were adopted. It would be because you bought out your aunt, and that portion of it, like there's a whole legal thing. But I think if you just expanded, maybe it's direct family or some other definition where it's available to different kinds of transfers, and it's focused on that instead of just a bloodline, or there's a way to make it work.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And, if we were more of a well-off family, we could have paid for a real estate attorney that could have helped us in the process. But, by the time of it all, we had to pay attorneys, like $80,000. And so
it's tough.
No, yeah, no, I agree.
Yep. Jake, you wanted to hop in real quick? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Rob's anecdotal experience and say the whole subject that we're talking about figuring out how to rebalance taxation and make sure that these various kinds of taxation go to the wealthy. I just want to personally say, I hate that that happened to you. That sucks. That's absolutely wrong. And it should never have happened. And people who are in the socioeconomic bracket that any of us are in should never get nailed with that kind of nonsense. And the margins are totally set in a way that leach the money out of our socioeconomic brackets for the more wealthy and more powerful. And that's nonsense. And I just wanted to, pipe in and say, if I had anything to say about how taxes were redone, there would be guarantees in place so that things like that, there wasn't just gray zones for you to fall in, because that stuff happens too often.
Yeah.
Yep. Agreed. Want to go over to Jordan? You wanted to respond? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of give another example of how this stuff can work, because I'm also in a similar situation to Robert. At least in the future, my parents are still alive, but when I do get the house, Prop 13 protects me. Like, that is the only reason I will be able to actually live where I grew up. If I was not able to do that, I would never be able to live in the place I grew up. And I think that there's something not necessarily technically wrong with that, but it doesn't sit well with me. It would force my hand to sell the house. Even if I had memories there with sentimental value, that kind of stuff, it would force my hand to do it. And I'm so thankful that something like Prop 13 exists, because also my dad bought this house in like the 70s. I mean, he bought it like, under $300,000. Thing's worth over $1 million now. I mean, I would never be able to keep that house. So it really is an issue for middle class families. You do get nailed with these crazy increases in tax just because of of not being protected by this specific proposition.
Thank you for sharing. Jordan and Robert, both interesting stories of why Prop 13 has affected your life in a very positive way. So thank you for sharing. Stasia, I know you have to run real quick. I just want to say it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today. Thank you for coming. Anything you want to say in closing before you take off, or?
Yeah, actually, I love the open, respectful, even friendly discussion, and the way that we've all been able to accept different viewpoints and really kind of dig into this stuff. And it was really fun to be here. So thank you.
You actually made it on a very tame podcast. So. This one is not, I mean, maybe we'll get to some really contentious stuff later, but yeah, this has been very tame and very respectful, and glad we could give you a good first experience on the podcast. Thanks for coming.
We knew you.
It was good having you here.
So we want you to have best behavior.
I appreciate it.
All the best, Stasia. We'd love to have you back if you would if you're up for one in the future.
Absolutely, definitely, and wish me luck on my hearing tomorrow. So
you got it.
You're gonna crush it.
Good luck. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Have a good night.
Good night.
All right. Moving on here. So Daniel, you said you wanted to hop in. I wasn't sure what you wanted to Nope. Okay.
But he's hopping onto the podcast.
Or not.
He's hopping onto the pod. Yeah, Daniel is going to be joining us for the second half of the podcast here. Welcome, Daniel. Great to have you back, man. So let's move on to the next topic here. So let me see. What did we have next? Oh, here we go. Okay. So now we get into the contentious stuff right after Stasia leaves, okay? So
there we go.
So voting rights, everybody. Voting rights. Actually, I want to pose this question to Robert here. First question goes to you. Pay attention.
I'm reading my book. I'm getting ready.
So let's start off with this, actually. And this was actually a question that Kylan wanted to ask. So thank you, Kylan, for this. Robert, why are conservatives averse to passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act in the Senate?
Which one?
The John Lewis Voting Rights Act.
What is
For those of us who didn't do our homework, what's involved with that act?
Yeah, this is not on the menu.
Is that giving?
Kylan, I'm going to give Kylan the opportunity to explain that. Go ahead.
So some of the provisions of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act include, so in 2014, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which required most southern states or states that had a history of voting rights violations obtained pre-clearance before putting in any new voting rights laws. Since that statute was eliminated by the Supreme Court, states have been going overboard in creating voter ID laws, strategically closing polling places, closing DMVs, reducing early voting hours when normally they would have to get pre-clearance from the Justice Department before taking those actions. And so also part of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is reinstating that section of the Voting Rights Act, but also making Election Day a national holiday and providing additional funds for states to provide more polling places and basically advance an automatic voter registration. So those are some of the highlights of the voting of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act.
Did you get all that, Robert? I know he was kind of breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, no, I got it all. I couldn't really say why Republicans would want to do that. Maybe I would assume that it's mostly because of voter integrity. I mean, when you look at the Supreme Court case, I think it was Crawford and Marion. It was voted 6-3 that states could have voter ID laws. So I know that Republicans do talk about a lot having ballot integrity. So I think that's their number one issue with that. But voter suppression of any kind is not something that I agree with. And I don't think that is what Republicans are trying to push. I think it's more of a ballot integrity. I mean,
let's I want to go to Amanda real quick. You had a question.
Well, it's not a
30-second rebuttal.
Oh, hold on.
Sorry, Kylan, what was that?
Can I get 30 seconds?
Go ahead.
So you bring up a very fair point about voter integrity, and I actually have no problem with that. But if you look at, there's tapes from a man who literally wrote the book. His daughter shared the thumb drive of all the ways he tried to, restrict voting rights. There's a guy in Philadelphia that literally said, that voter ID won Trump the state. And I would be more prone to believe voter integrity if, on top of voter ID, saying you could get one for free, but at the same time they say, well, you have to also show a birth certificate that you have to pay for. Also, you have to make sure to be here in person, but we're also going to be closing down the bus routes to get you to the DMV, which also was closed in primarily minority and lower income communities. And so when you look at that on the whole of a lot of different pieces, it seems to me that it's strategically meant to try to curtail voting rights in predominantly minority and lower income communities. And again, if everything was on a level, I would have no problem with saying, hey, you know what, we got to get an ID to get on an airplane. We got to get an ID to buy cigarettes. We got to get an ID to buy booze. If you're a good looking woman and you look young, you're going to get ID to go to the club. But you can't say you want to get ID for voter integrity, but then make it harder to get said integrity. And sorry if I'm breaking up, but that's just kind of the point that I want to make, that sometimes things can be a little bit fishy, in making it harder to have that integrity for people.
So, Robert, did you get all that?
Did any of that come through?
No, I got that.
Okay.
Well, I think the problem is when we look at the actual statistics in 2018, Black turnout in the midterms had grown by 27%, and Hispanic turnout had rose by 50%. And when we look at the governor race in Georgia, Stacey Abrams had done a lot of complaining about how there was Black voter suppression. But when you actually look at the Brookings Institute, they had actually found that Black voter turnout had exceeded white voter turnout. So I think that there is a partial aspect of the Democratic Party wanting to falsely push that minorities that their votes are being suppressed. I mean, there are other aspects that we could bring up. I think it was they were saying how Native Americans, I can't remember what state it was. It was somewhere up north, I think like North Dakota. What was it, Montana?
Montana.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree that the Montana thing was pretty messed up. I think that the government should find a way for them to be able to get a government issued ID for free with no hassle. So I will admit that there are certain aspects of government that not purposely suppress vote, but I think with all the laws and all the different regulations, it makes it easier to put blame on the government when they could have just eliminated the law.
Yeah. Amanda, your response?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I want to first start with the ballot integrity and the ID laws. We have to remember that one, ballot integrity is very subjective. You have people, often volunteers, comparing signatures. They are not necessarily qualified to do that. Some states probably actually employ people who regularly do this, so they might be a little more trustworthy. But when you have regular lay persons trying to say your signature from when you were 16 on your driver's license doesn't match now or does match now, that's a subjective issue. And then you also have things like voter ID laws that, while good in concept, are not always good in practice. For example, in states that require your name on your ballot to match your birth certificate, what do you do for a woman who gets married who changes her name? A woman who gets married who maybe gets divorced, maybe she gets married again, changes her name. You also have problems with the accessibility to get IDs. So the population that I work with are indigent, homeless people, low income folks, sometimes even lower middle class individuals. And if they don't have an ID, it is extremely difficult sometimes to get, a lot of hurdles to jump over economically to get IDs that might qualify for voting purposes. For example, somebody who has a DUI.
Oh, did we lose Amanda?
I think we
so.
lost
Seems that way.
It looks like we did. Anyway, let's go to Vlad. You had a response real quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to reply, and add to Kylan's point about voter suppression actually happening. And after, after the Supreme Court ruling, I found a very nice article from Reuters that cited the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights that actually discovered that since that ruling in 2013, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,200 polling places across the South in predominantly lower income and African-American neighborhoods were closed. And also, we don't have to go that far back to look at it. I mean, there's plenty of outrage in Milwaukee during that state's primary just this year as to Milwaukee being that state's largest city, I believe, or maybe second largest, I'm not sure about population, went from, I think, 180 polling places down to 5. And, maybe you're not enacting like actual, you're not banning people specifically from voting by doing that, but by creating a reduction like that, you're disincentivizing a lot of people from voting because a lot of people can't wait in line all day. There's no like national holiday for voting. Companies don't give you the day off. Like most people do it before work or after work. Can't wait in line for 4, 5, 6 hours. So I think that's a problem. And I think that's why we actually do need this Voting Rights Act passed.
Isn't it supposed to be a law? Like you're supposed to get time off to be able to vote?
No.
I think
No.
Oh, okay.
That's
why the
a
John
lot of
Lewis Act is
companies
important.
a lot of companies are making a big public statement out of it. I believe Apple recently announced that they're giving every employee the day off to vote.
Quickly, Vlad, and then I want to let Amanda finish her point.
Yeah. No, that's all I was going to say. Like, there's a lot of companies doing it individually, but it's not mandated at a federal or state level that people should be given the day off.
Yep. Agreed. Amanda, go ahead and finish your point before you got disconnected. Then I want to go to.
I have no idea where I left off at the point when it dropped off, but I wanted to talk about the turnout issue. I wanted to talk about the turnout. I'm sorry?
You dropped out around something you said about DUIs.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So like if you have a DUI and you never have enough money to pay off the fines and the interest adds up, you're never going to get a license. You will never get it back in California. So then what are you going to use to vote? Do you have your birth certificate still? Do you have the appropriate forms? It just creates hardship for people who are already disadvantaged. And I wanted to talk just kind of briefly about turnout issues. That turnout in minority communities is usually in spite of voter suppression efforts. Like Vlad said, reducing the number of polling stations, polling places, especially in communities that are, mostly people of color. We also see kind of the advent of lifting bans on felons being able to vote. I think Florida is still grappling with that in the courts because that has to do with paying off fines. Iowa, their governor just signed into law this week, lifting the ban on felons voting. So we know, despite what people's opinions might be, that Black and brown folks are disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. And as a result, they are disproportionately disenfranchised. And when they get the vote back, their voter turnout can increase in those communities. It's same with, we're seeing the law that said jury duty, people who have felony convictions can be on juries now. We're going to see more Black and brown folks showing up for jury duty as a result. So I don't think we can just look and say, oh, voter suppression doesn't happen because more Black people voted. I think that's in spite of efforts that either are purposeful or are tinged with implicit bias to try to prevent certain communities from getting the vote out.
Yeah. Interesting point. I want to go over to Daniel. You've been waiting since you got in here. You wanted to make a point on this. Go ahead, buddy. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to be here. Okay. So Amanda kind of made the point I was going to make, or one of the points I was going to make, which is that finding that those areas had increased voter turnout from minorities is not an indicator that it's that the idea of voter suppression in minority neighborhoods is a hoax, because all that means is like that was the best that could be done with, like, if there's fewer polling places, if there's more restrictions to voting, then there's no way that doesn't have an effect. So if there is still a rise in the amount of people voting, that means it's despite that, not implying that voter suppression is a hoax. And, also if we're talking about Georgia, we're also talking about a state where the Secretary of State was running for governor and refused to recuse himself from being Secretary of State and running the election that he himself was running in. So I think that is, noteworthy. But the overall point I kind of wanted to make was kind of sort of along the line of Kylan's, which is that I understand that voter integrity is something that we should be thinking about. Like, our election security is important, but it's very difficult to take Republicans at face value when they use that as their reason for what seems like voter suppression, because specifically a number of examples, there's Donald Trump who said on Monday, I think it was last Monday, that he said the levels of voting that if you'd ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again, right? So there's sort of like, and then you go back to 1980, where Paul Weyrich, who was a conservative activist at the time, said, I don't want everyone to vote. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down. So you have these very masks off, open acknowledgments that when more people vote, Republicans lose. And when that kind of thing, and similar with Florida, the state on the ballot voted to restore voting rights to felons, and the Republican legislator has fought that every step of the way. And so when you have what seems like these very clear interests in people not voting, it kind of undercuts the idea that these things that could be seen as voter suppression are for the sake of voting integrity and not just a way of keeping in power despite the fact that they would lose a fair election.
Yeah. Robert, do you agree with what Daniel said?
Not really. I mean, you would have to show me evidence that if more minorities show up, that's because of voter suppression. I mean, we can.
That's not what he said. I'm pretty sure that's not what he meant.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I think what you guys were saying was that more minorities are showing up.
Before we keep going here, Daniel, do you want to clarify your point real quick to Robert, and then Robert, you can give a quick response?
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing about the minorities was I was saying that even if numbers are showing that more minorities voted in 2018, that doesn't mean that I'm not saying that's because of voter suppression. I'm saying that's despite voter suppression.
Well, I know, but you have no evidence of that claim as well. So, I mean,
but the only actual hard evidence that we have is that polling stations were shut down and more restrictive voting laws were put into place. That's the only actual evidence that we have.
Yeah. But that's not evidence that people are purposefully trying to suppress the vote either.
Well, here's another example, just for correlation.
Mhm.
There was a Supreme Court case, I think it was called Yick Woe. I don't remember who it was. It might have been like the city of San Francisco. Back 100 years ago, they passed a law about regulating laundry facilities. It didn't say anything about Chinese people in the law, but the only people or the majority of people affected by it were Chinese communities and Chinese immigrants who ran these laundry facilities. And what the Supreme Court ultimately said was, okay, you didn't say anything about race. You didn't say anything about country of origin when you passed this law, but the disparate impact makes it so clear that that's what it's about, that this is illegal. And so if you use that conceptually and you look at what happens with voter suppression, what people on the left call voter suppression, or what we say are forms of voter suppression, you look, where are the places being removed from? What communities are they leaving? What communities are being disproportionately impacted in the majority impacted by certain laws, like in Montana, where they're saying you have to have a physical address to vote, and a lot of Native Americans on reservations don't have that. The disparate impact is to such a degree that we can look at it and say, that's what that was about. That's where the evidence is.
Okay.
So it's not, they're not going to come out and say, we hate Black people, we don't want them to vote, unless they're dumb enough to say that in front of someone who's going to report it.
I don't think that they think that.
Some people do, unfortunately. Unfortunately,
yeah, but
so okay, but it's less about we hate Black people. It's less about we hate Black people and we don't want them to vote. It's more that we hate people voting not for us. And so that was kind of my overall point, which was, and the thing that I would love to know your thoughts on, Robert, is the sort of openness about if more people vote, we lose, and what that says about the ideas behind these laws, and also how those interact with the 24th Amendment, which is specifically a law against an amendment to the Constitution that is against poll taxes, which what you consider a poll tax is up for interpretation, but I consider it any extra cost that you have to pay just in order to exercise your constitutional right to vote.
You really don't want to ask my opinion on this, because I think that voting, I'm more of a person that believes in an intellectual democracy. I don't believe in an open and free democracy. I think that people should be more educated before they vote.
That's actually something that you and Sham agree on. That's crazy.
Yeah,
I never thought you guys agree on anything.
I actually can agree with that as well.
I gotten that idea from watching a Socrates video. Socrates was very big on intellectual democracies. He had brought up, would you want a seafarer to have his ship ran by his crew, or would you rather have the ship ran by people who were masters in seafaring? So, I mean, my opinion on this is I think that people should be intellectually prepare, or whatever, should have more education before they vote. So my opinion is probably very different than most people's. So I really don't know how to answer your question. I think what I would say is, yeah, I really don't have, because my opinion is so much different than probably 98% of people. Most people believe in a free democracy. So
for sure. No, and I want to get some other voices in here to respond to this. Jordan, you were first. Do you have a response to what Robert was saying?
No, actually, I just wanted to add to what Amanda was saying in regards to the naming and the names. And I just wanted to give some visibility to trans people because changing your name
Yeah.
is not easy and it takes time. And they are
Thanks, I forgot about that. I'm sorry.
disproportionately affected by this. It is absolutely insane. So it's not just, name changes like that. It's trans people. It's a whole different category and subset.
Good
So
point.
that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to give some
Thanks
visibility.
for that. I apologize that I forgot about.
Don't apologize. It's fine.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be better at being more intersectional. So
That's why we're all here to add to each other's points. So thank you. Jake, you wanted to respond. I'm not sure to what exactly,
No,
but
it's
to
cool.
clarify
We're
that.
good. You can
What's
go on
that?
to Jules.
Okay, Jules, go ahead, man.
Well, I wanted to respond to Robert's point about people having to have a certain amount of education in order to vote. And I kind of wonder, like, where do we draw the line on that? Where do you say, oh, he's smart enough to vote, he's educated enough to vote, he isn't? Because I think, especially in America, we have a right, I mean, as much as I dislike it, but people have a right to be stupid and still vote because voting is the most innate part of American democracy or democracy in general. So to say like, oh, they have to be educated. Well, how educated? What does that even mean? What are you saying even? Because that doesn't even, educated is what? They've been to college? I mean, I know plenty of stupid people who've been to college.
I haven't been to college. I have some college education, but it has nothing to do with being educated on your GPA.
So what then?
You would have to know more about the parties that you're voting for. You would have to know how government actually works. And we had discussed this with what was that bill with the freelancers? And then people with, freelancing jobs ended up getting screwed over because they had to file as 1099 employees and
maybe 12, maybe 10 for that. Okay. And then how do you determine? So how do you determine that? Like a test, because that's anti-democratic. That is voter suppression.
And it's actually
it's actually not illegal. Nothing it says about intelligence, but what's going to happen is then people are going to take what I said and say that I'm trying to suppress voters.
No. What I'm saying is that the determination.
How do you determine it?
I'm not saying anybody. I'm not saying anybody in here.
Hey guys. I will start muting people.
Do it. So I'm not saying anybody in here, but that.
Are you Amanda?
You're saying you want Amanda to go?
I said Amanda. Yeah.
Oh,
I'll get you next though for a quick response.
I thought you were saying
me. I was saying is I brought this up in one of our first podcasts when we discussed this. This actually is already like if you're doing this based on intelligence or what people know, there has to be a demarcation for it. Or how do you determine the threshold? Test, some sort of test. That was already made illegal because of what happened during the civil rights movement, what was happening to Black folks when they would try to go vote. They were forced to take literary tests in order to vote. This is already something that we can't do in this country. It's illegal. We can't have an intelligence test or intelligence quotient or threshold for voting. The threshold is you're an American and you're over 18, and in certain states you're not a felon or not.
I could read the
quick
Constitution.
responses, and then we got to move on, guys.
We can go to the
Constitution. It was part of one of the Voting Rights Act provisions or amendments after that. Not everything is in the Constitution, but I'm just saying, like that's the problem with it is it will have a disparate impact on people, and it's not going to be the people you think it'll.
It is, but I'm not saying that it's going to have an impact on minority communities. I mean, I'm not the one making assumption that minority communities are not.
It's historical.
So are you saying that minority communities can't pass the test that I'm asking for government?
You know that's not what I'm asking. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay, so
that's almost kind of what you just implied, though.
Hold on. We already know that education systems and funding for education, quality of education is not the same for every community and disproportionately impacts communities of color. Okay. And we already saw this. We did because we weren't alive, but there's already historical precedent for literary tests, intelligence tests being used to eliminate voting for certain populations, specifically Black and brown folks. So I understand you're coming from a good place, but it is a very slippery slope that we should not backslide to, because there have already been laws about it because it was so bad.
It's a
Quick
loaded
response.
idea. You know,
Hold on, Jules. Quick response from Jake here.
I mean, so I think we kind of have testing for this already. It's high school civics classes, and if we just did a little bit of restructuring of our education system to maybe make it so that it was good,
God
we
forbid.
already have this all done. Like, fuck testing at the polling station. Let's just make school worth going to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. 100%.
I'm with you.
So guys, so this has been litigated. Okay.
Yeah.
So when women had to basically riot and march and fight to be able to vote because they weren't people enough to vote in the eyes of the men who framed the Constitution originally. I was once considered 3/5 of a human being, and like I had to, people who were of color had to count jelly beans in a jar and do all sorts of tests to be able to vote. Okay, there is no ambiguity. The right to vote is fundamental. It is sacrosanct. You know, John Lewis got his head cracked in and bled on the ground walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the right to vote. People were beaten senselessly for the right to vote and died. People had dogs sicked on them for the right to vote. People were sprayed with water hoses for the right to vote. And there can be no test to the right to vote. If you're a United States citizen and you're of voting age and you're registered, you vote, period. Because if we start trying to slip back to saying somehow an arbitrary or some sort of arbitrary test for a person to have the right to vote, that's going to be a slippery slope. That's going to be a Pandora's box. And rest assured that it's not going to stop at a basic test. Something is going to be layered on. Something is going to be added on. You know, if you're 18, you don't have felonies, you're registered to vote, you're a United States citizen, your right to vote is sanctioned, period. We have to learn from our past so we don't repeat those same mistakes. Because if we go down that path, we're going to get back to the place that we're in, and we don't want to be there. And so that's what I got on that.
But wait,
Thank you,
Kylan,
Vlad, for letting me get ahead of you. So,
if there aren't any
I know
statues,
Vlad
how are we
wants
going to
to
remember?
get-
God. I don't know, dude.
Sorry.
I'm not gonna jump in on that one.
For another time.
You know, hopefully, you know, yeah, but you know, what I will say is, you know, it seems the more and more that we get to teaching actual history, somehow that's now being seen as anti-American by teaching history. You know, not because, you know, all of a sudden if we're not, you know, washing away our past sins and sanitizing it, somehow that's anti-American, and I don't like that rhetoric coming from certain circles. I think history needs to be taught accurately, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Yes, sir. I can't wait until you have your regular internet back, but thank you for your points. They're appreciated as always. So let's take it over to Vlad next, man. Go ahead, Vlad.
Yeah, I actually this is more of a question than I guess kind of a statement and a question that I wanted to pose to the group as a whole, and maybe also more directly to you, Robert. Since you know you are advocating for the intellectual democracy where people should be, you know, educated, and you don't necessarily want like a group of farmers running a ship per se. Would it also make sense to have the same type of standard go for people running the government? I mean, right now we've got people making, you know, policy about, you know, science who don't know jack about the topic. you've got a group of like old white men making policy about women's reproductive rights. Like, wouldn't you want experts in the field to be making policy? It doesn't. I feel like that sword of the intellectual democracy kind of cuts both ways. Like, you want smart people voting, which we definitely have to revamp the education system, like Jake said. But also, you would want people in positions of power who are well versed on the topic. Like, so that's my open-ended question to the group.
I think you made my point for me. If we're stating that people in the government are too stupid to run our presidency, then I think that you're kind of making my point that why we would need an intellectual democracy would be that so we could educate voters, so then we wouldn't have quote unquote stupid orange people running our United States.
I didn't say anything about stupid orange
no,
people.
I did.
Yeah, no, and
Whoa.
fine. I agree with you on that. But I'm saying, it's not a matter of, it's not a matter of people voting for, specific individuals. I think you have to have, in order for an intellectual democracy to work properly, you need to have some sort of guideline and some sort of standard for people who are running for positions of power. You've got, you got to have economists in there. You got to have attorneys in there. You got to have scientists in there. Instead, we've got people in government who, I mean, I hate to quite literally believe that angels walk the earth. Like, I don't think those people should be making policy about, about science and about women's reproductive rights. But, that's just me. So I really do think that sword cuts both ways.
Well, I think that, Robert, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think you are a little bit more socially liberal, right?
Yeah, definitely. But I don't think that we should make laws to create equality. But yeah. I'm very, socially liberal. I would say, I believe in equality for everybody. Gotcha. For sure. At the maximum extent,
Let's go over to Daniel real quick. Daniel, you had a response. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. I'm done.
Yeah, I guess so. My big concern with the idea of this intellectual democracy is that sort of consistently, and this ties back into my original point where I was talking about Republicans being sort of masks off about when people vote more, we lose, or they lose, right? Like that was something that they've been very open about. And so it is in their best interest for less people to vote. And I think sort of the next step of that is that it is in the best interest of whoever is currently in power to make it more difficult to vote, or because they get to be the ones who decide who it gets more difficult for. And so my concern about any kind of intellectual democracy or any sort of like test or requirement in order to vote is that the people who will pass the law are the people who are already in power. And the people who are already in power are going to pass that law in a way that makes it more likely for them to stay in power. So we don't ever really get a pure intellectual democracy. We don't ever really get a pure voting system. All we get is just a continuation of a paradigm of whoever is currently in charge. And so that is my kind of concern with that. And again, that brings it back to the idea of where the people in power now have been very open about wanting to reduce the ability to vote of certain groups because as they have directly said, when lots of people vote, they don't get to be in power.
Well, I think my response to that would be Congress is the one who passes laws. So for any law to be passed, even if Republicans do have a majority of 51, they would, or whatever it is, 53, they would still need 7 Democrats to pass any kind of law. And also Democrats also have a majority in the House. So for any law to be passed with any kind of voting law, it would have to go through right now, it would have to go through.
But that's only federal. Democrat. That's only federal because this is happening at the state and local level. Like poll closure.
Well, I'm talking about a federal election. I mean, states can run.
But in order to vote in a federal election, polling places are closed by states and at the local level. And so that affects the federal election. And there are many states where there are Republican-led legislators that have been doing that, Georgia being one example. I think, Vlad, you were saying Milwaukee, was that it?
Yeah, Milwaukee went from 100.
Milwaukee being another one. So it's not just a matter of who is in Congress. It's also a matter of the people who are in power making it more difficult to vote, and people who are in power also in terms of states as well as federally.
Yeah, I was just talking about the intellectual democracy. For any kind of law to pass like that, it would have to go through the government. But
let's go to Jake.
I think that we could have some kind of intellectual democracy, but again, I think that to do that, we would have to, as a country, be focused a whole lot more on intellectualism. And I don't know about you, but as a 90s kid, I grew up in an era where the smart kid was made fun of and beaten up, and the dumb kid had all the friends and all the social clout. And in a world where those kids have grown up with that kind of socialization, we've gotten just worse and worse and worse into this dumb is okay and dumb is an acceptable way to be. But I'm not pushing that on either side of the spectrum. I think everybody suffers from this, and like even me, I have my moments of failing that way. And I think that if we were to, as a society, as a country, really push heavily into education from square one straight through, because I mean our system right now is I don't know, I'm at war. On one side, I want to say it's absolute garbage, and on the other side, I want to say it works in some ways. But I really think we could do a whole lot better, and doing better would arm the population for an intellectual democracy. But if you just switched to it, there are a huge segment of the population on every side of the spectrum that literally wouldn't know how to put their name on the thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have kids who don't do that basic of things on their SATs. So you can bet adults would fail that same kind of nonsense too. So it's possible, but it couldn't start at the voting booth.
Yeah, it would be something that would have to be implemented, and there would have to be, free classes that would have to be offered through the federal government. So that, it wouldn't be something that you had to pay for the education. It'd be something that would be offered to everybody for free.
I would think that folding it into some part of primary education would be the most sensible way to do that.
Yeah.
But I would be concerned that there's still some gray zone for, say, mentally disabled people or what have you to not be able to pass those basic tests, and for their rights to be impinged, which we've already seen happen with this idea.
Yeah. Quick question from Daniel. Go ahead.
So Robert, real quick, I don't want to put words in your mouth. So I wanted to clarify. So my question about if we're okay with leading Republicans being open about how less people vote or more people voting means they wouldn't be in power. And so your response to that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was that is okay because you don't think that everyone should be voting anyways? Or
no, my response is that Donald Trump says stupid shit sometimes. I think that would be I think that would be my response.
But it hasn't just been Donald Trump who said that. That's been said by multiple Republicans over the last, I think, 20 to 30 years.
Yeah, sure. They're idiots too for saying that.
I mean, I would agree with you, even if it is true that they're idiots for saying it, because it's just straight poor strategy.
Just for saying it or for actually believing it?
Oh boy.
Well, if it were true for saying it, because if it's you don't hand off your cards that way, that's just poor strategy.
Yeah, well, they're making laws based off of that idea is the concern.
Yeah. Jordan, quick point.
I didn't want to make a quick point, but you're forcing my hand. Been waiting for a while.
You put yourself in the queue, dude. What do you got to say?
I'm just saying. No. What I mean is I want a longer point. But anyway, I want to talk about conceptually the idea of an intellectual democracy. I want to talk about what we're actually talking about. We're talking about people who are well informed being able to vote, and then people who are able to do the job well being in positions of power, just like Vlad was pointing out. We want engineers up there. We want scientists in Congress. We want these people in there. That's what we're really talking about. I mean, yes, there are other stuff that's attached to it, but it can be cut off. I'm fine with cutting off the testing. That's stupid. But, when it comes down to it, I have no problem conceptually with the idea of people who are qualified for the job having the job. It disgusts me how there are politicians that are career politicians. That's their entire job. They don't actually do anything. They've never done anything in their lives. They've just been a talking head. So how can you expect them, like you were saying, to make any sound decision when it comes to science or anything else along those lines? And conceptually, the idea of people, at least having enough of an idea of what's going on to make an educated decision based on their point of view, which may not be the same, and in fact will never be the same as another person, which is fine, is nothing really wrong in my head. I mean, just that the concept in and of itself. And I just wanted to kind of clarify, because it sounds like the intellectual democracy was being used as a buzzword to me, and I don't like seeing that, because we're kind of demonizing it when the concept itself I think is great. But there again are things attached to it that I don't agree with, like the testing.
Gotcha. Jules, do you agree with that?
I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, I agree that people who actually are qualified to be leaders, who actually have knowledge and authority on subjects, ought to be in that position. It seems to me that they don't want to, though, because it doesn't seem like they're running, or they're not being tapped to run by the committees, the DNC and the RNC. They don't seem like they're interested. They want to be scientists. They want to be engineers. They want to be in their field. And as much as we could really use them in politics, it doesn't seem like they really want to be there. And
that's a fair point.
I mean, that's unfortunate.
Excellent.
It would be great if we could get them to run for office. It would be great. I would absolutely support that 100%. But that's their choice.
Jules, I got to tell you, man, your boy John Delaney was one of the first people to get eliminated from the primaries, and he was like the biggest climate change advocate up there.
Yeah.
So,
Sadly, that's probably
I
why
should
I
tell
voted.
you all you need to know right there. But
He's the governor of Washington. He was
But you
there.
also have to have the
Inslee.
Sorry.
Yeah,
what's that?
Inslee.
Inslee.
Oh, did I
Yeah.
get that wrong? Oh, my bad.
Yeah. You also have to have the charisma. You have to have the war chest. You have to have the backing of strong people, and usually that means people with a lot of money.
So that essentially suggests a systemic change needs to happen for that to be
right.
feasible.
Yeah. I mean, the system entirely is a little messed up, right? So, I mean, I would love to see it. Honestly, I would love if we could encourage scientists to be members of the political community. And some of them are, but not enough.
Agreed.
Quick
You know,
response
if
from
we-
Jake, and then we got to move on.
If we look outside of our own country, there's leadership in other countries that the president or whatever analog thing they have is somebody with a high science degree. So we know that happens. We just know that in America, we have a paradigm where up until extremely recently, you could only run for president if you had a law degree. Otherwise, you were going to be kind of laughed at if you didn't have some, civics kind of degree or some kind of long-standing history in those categories. And honestly, with Trump utterly destroying that as a long-standing tradition, we could see all sorts of things in the next little while. I mean, we did have a porn star run not too long ago, but there's no reason that we couldn't see a much broader spectrum of educational and experiential backgrounds running for president. I'm not.
I think
Everyone gonna
the
like
Pope
Google
is
who
a
that was now,
chemist,
or-
right? I mean,
I can't remember what her name was. Crap.
All right. I'm kind of bummed out that that this is the last topic, just because we have so little time left. But I'd be remiss if we didn't get to this quickly, at least to end the night on here. Mail-in ballots. A lot of people feel and I should say, like, more so on the right, feel that if a nationwide vote by mail system is implemented, that there will be a lot of fraud as a result. And I want to get the opinion of a few of you on whether or not you believe that. So let's go to the resident dissenter, Robert. What do you think? If we institute a nationwide vote by mail program, do you think there will be a lot of fraud as a result?
I don't think that there's going to be massive voter fraud, but I think that there will be increased voter fraud. We could look at different aspects of, what's happening in, I think it's New Jersey, or you can look at what happened in North Carolina. I know a major problem that I have with most of these voting laws is ballot harvesting, where, a Republican had went around and collected open ballots, and then filled out the ballots, and sent them in. And it actually, I think it cost the election by how small of a margin there was. So like I said, I'm the person that, is not really going to be what other conservatives or right-wing libertarians think, because like I said, again, I believe in intellectual democracy. I don't think that mass voting is the best thing for our country. So I don't think that, but, I think my main problem is with ballot harvesting, really, where you can have, partisan third-party individuals going and knocking on doors and collecting ballots and then turning them in at the ballot box. But it's not something that's massive, like the president is stating. But when you look at different studies that said that there's an increase for potential for voter fraud for absentee ballots.
I've heard ballot harvesting is kind of a buzzword recently. Admittedly, I don't know as much about it as I should. But Daniel wanted to respond, so I'm going to give him the opportunity.
Can we get a quick definition on ballot harvesting? I haven't heard that before.
That's my point. Is I'm not as well read on what ballot harvesting is, but
it's basically when someone goes to a bunch of houses and collects their ballots and then basically fills it out for them.
Or it doesn't have to be even
right.
Fill it out. You could also, like, what happens is, like, you could be part of the, the Democrat Marin County or the Republican Marin County, and you go and knock on a whole bunch of old folks' homes, doors, or churches or whatever, and go and collect their ballots.
I have a quick definition. I have the actual definition from Wikipedia. Ballot collecting, also called ballot harvesting, is characterized by the gathering and submitting of absentee or mail-in voter ballots by third-party individuals, volunteers, or workers, rather than submission by the voters themselves directly to ballot collection sites.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I speak on that? Basically, ballot harvesting, or ballot collection, as it's also known, is basically a third party. They go to a house. It's actually usually not individuals' houses. The Democratic Party might have a list of people who are older, or they're disabled, or they're infirmed, and in that case, they might go door to door. But it's not very widespread in that way. It's usually they will go to retirement homes where people aren't able to get out to a ballot or get to a mailbox or whatever, and they collect everybody's ballots after they fill them out, after they're sealed, after they're signed. So there is a certain potential, if it's not regulated properly, for those ballots to not reach their final destination. But in general, the organizations that do collect those ballots are pretty well vetted, especially in California, I know, at least. But it's not really, harvesting is kind of a weird misnomer to it, I think, because it's really just trying to get the ballots from people who are unable to get to mailboxes too. So it might be administratives within the old folks' home, the convalescence homes, etc. It might be members of the party, it might be a third party, but it's usually pretty well and above board. And there's very, very few instances that are documented of it actually not reaching its destination, like what Robert said in South Carolina or North Carolina.
North, yeah.
And in that case, they were not collecting ballots that were already filled out and finalized. They were collecting ballots that were partially filled out or not quite filled out, and they were supposedly helping them fill out, and They were not sincere in what they were doing, which is why the election got thrown.
Oh yeah, they totally cheated. They took the things
Yeah,
and
they
had them just
absolutely
had them just sign it,
Yeah,
and
it
then
was-
they
Mhm.
and that was it. They had them pretty much sign it, and for every 10 that they had, they got $500 or something like that.
Yeah, it was pretty brazen and extremely illegal, and it got caught pretty much immediately, which is why generally that sort of thing is probably not too well abused. It has potential for abuse, and of course those things always do. I think there's always a potential for abuse of any system, but there's not really any evidence of real ballot fraud on a wide scale that has actually thrown any major elections. Maybe some very close local elections a couple times I've seen some evidence of, but a major presidential election, no way. You'd have to be able to influence millions of votes in many different places in order to actually influence any sort of change in what the vote would actually be.
Daniel, your response?
Yeah. First, I want to pass on Tyler's comment from the comments on our pod, which is Tyler was making the point that the example that was given, they were caught. And so the idea that like if there is fraud, it is generally caught. Not always, but if in these cases of blatant fraud that people are always giving examples of, we know that it happened because it got caught, right? But I also really want to agree with Jules in the sense that it is absolutely possible that with more mail-in ballots, more absentee voting, which are the same thing, there's definitely a possibility for more instances of voting fraud. That is absolutely the case. However, at the same time, when we look at the sort of like cost benefit here, right? If we say no mail-in voting, if we say mail-in voting is too risky, too much fraud, then we're asking a huge swath of the population of the United States to show up to a polling station during a pandemic. And that doesn't seem worth it.
There are ways around this, though. I mean, you could have a drive.
Hold on. Let me finish what I was saying here. Actually, and specifically drive-in, there are a lot of people who don't drive. So my point is a mail-in ballot voting system lets a huge amount of people who are stuck at home, whether it be because of the pandemic, whether it be because they are, they don't have the mobility, or because they live too far from a polling station and can't take off work. Whatever it is, it allows a huge swath of the population to vote who otherwise wouldn't be able to. And I think that is worth the as yet very few instances of voter fraud that have come out because of mail-in ballots. That feels like a trade-off. But again, that's coming from a place of wanting more people to vote, which is a little bit contrary to what we've been speaking of for the past little bit.
Right. Wanted to give Amanda an opportunity to respond next.
Thanks. So I have kind of three broad points. The first one is the fact that, we've been having absentee or mail-in voting for like over 100 years. And
much over.
I'm sorry?
Much more.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking of like World War I, right? And I don't know if they had it back in the Civil War. I don't know.
Yep, they did.
I guess they did. We didn't study that in my history major. But so basically, it's been going on for a long time. If this were a method, well, and actually, since it's been going on such a long time, it's become more sophisticated. It's become more advanced. You have barcodes. You do have those subjective signature checks. It's much more sophisticated. And if it were really, truly vulnerable to widespread fraud, there would be evidence of that. 150 years worth of evidence you could have. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but if it's happening, it is so low level, such a minute instance of it that it's not going to have any sort of impact, like I think Jules said. My second point has to do with the politicization of it recently. And that partly has to do with, this isn't because he's Trump, but Trump is the one who's largely promoting this on Twitter and in his interviews. that it's rife with fraud and we shouldn't do it. But the problem is, like, the military's been doing it for 100 years to 150 years. Expats, Americans who live abroad, have been doing it. Trump does it. Trump votes by mail. Politicians who are criticizing it, they vote by mail. And the thing that's really bugged me this week is the fact that Trump has made it about face. He's now been on Twitter saying, oh, voting by mail is great in the states with governors who like me, basically. Like, I'm from Arizona, and he met with Governor Doug Ducey this week and was like, oh, Arizona's vote by mail system, it's so great, so trustworthy, yada, yada. You know, I don't actually think he knows anything about individual states' voting systems at all. But the fact that he is politicizing it based on governors he has close relationships with, when he, in fact, is someone who votes by mail, I think is problematic in terms of how he's making it a political issue, when it shouldn't be a political issue to make voting easier for people. And the third point I wanted to make is that if we're going to talk about voting integrity and whether it's fraud or not, I think we should be far more concerned with electronic voting, these electronic voting machines that can be hacked, that have been hacked, that have been targeted by foreign nations, or just 17-year-olds in Florida. So although I think that was Twitter accounts, but still, I think that voting by mail should be the thing that everybody agrees on. It should be the easiest thing to do for anybody who has the ability to do it.
Excellent point. I want to go to Vlad next. You wanted to respond?
Not really respond per se. I've actually been in pretty strong agreement with what everyone's been saying, specifically Amanda just now. And Amanda, you kind of stole a little bit of my thunder here because of your point with voting machines. So before I go there, I'm just going to say, I believe there are 11 states that currently have a requirement that your mail-in ballot be signed by a witness. Which is one way to kind of try to help curtail that, that fraud scenario. And I think, and this is a word that's been used by a few people here, potential. And I agree, there is potential for fraud. There's potential that, an entire truckload of ballots is going to get thrown out. Like I grew up in the former Soviet Union. I was there during Ukraine's first ever democratic election. Granted, I was 7, but I heard these stories since then of someone showing up at a polling place with 300 ballots wrapped up in a rubber band and opening the box and just throwing them in there. There's a possibility, anything's possible, but I've done research on this, and outside of a handful of cases, I haven't been able to find any real major instances of widespread voter fraud. And in the situations that I was able to find, those election results were thrown out, people were convicted. So I really think that voting by mail is safe. Like Amanda was saying, military does it, expats do it, astronauts do it, President Trump does it. A lot of the vocal critics of vote by mail do it themselves. So I think it's actually kind of hypocritical of them to say that the system is just horribly unreliable, wrought with voter fraud, and then for them to turn around and do it. We send prescriptions by mail, we send stimulus checks by mail, tax returns. Like I think it's secure, and I think the biggest problem is the fact that we have such a high reliance on new technologies. And I remember seeing, reading articles about voting machines and seeing videos of reporters going into a voting booth and trying to press a button that says, like, I'm going to vote for Obama, and then the voting machine just says, nope, you're voting for Romney. Or you have situations where hackers were brought into the polling place and they were told, hack this machine, and within 5 minutes they were in the system changing votes. So there's a potential for fraud no matter what you do, but I really think that voting by mail is a secure system. I think it can be done, and I think right now, given our current situation with polling places closing and the pandemic, it needs to happen, because I think it's the only way that we're going to be able to have an actual election. Next.
Thank you for that point, Vlad.
I think Daniel had a point he wanted to make.
I think we're
Thank you,
actually
Jake.
going to Robert for a reply as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Daniel, and then I want to end this topic with Robert. I want to give him the last word. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just think that, we've been talking about how secure or mostly secure voting by mail is, but we have to look at sort of what's happening right now, which is a Republican donor, basically very much a political hack, being installed as Postmaster General of the U.S. Postal Service, and now we're having huge slowdowns in mail, and he's curtailed all overtime and made it so, and is taking an active role in basically destroying the U.S. Postal Service, which is kind of a case of, well, if there's not a problem with mail-in ballots, I'll make one. So, and closing post offices, which in a lot of cases, post offices are used as basically as banks and DMVs in, a lot of low-income areas. So we also have to look at, again, we're saying this stuff, we're approaching this argument like it's a legitimate argument. And I think that that's kind of silly. We're approaching this thing like it's like, oh no, we have to really argue and make a point that mail-in ballots are secure. No, that's not what's happening here. This is even that conversation is kind of silly, because what's happening here is a very clear attempt at voter suppression, down to sabotaging the system that mail-in voting would rely on in the first place. Like, the conversation shouldn't be, is mail-in voting secure? The conversation should be, why is active voter suppression happening, and why are we falling for the bait of arguing of their talking points when they've been very masked off of what they're trying to do, which is voter suppression every step of the way.
Well,
thank you for mentioning the post office. Actually, that's something I wanted to bring up. Actually, sorry, Robert, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Robert, I want to give you the last word on this, actually, and then we're going to move on. Go ahead.
So I've never personally seen that Republicans are actively trying to do this. I mean, when we look at New York City, and it's been, I don't know how long it's been. I think it's been 3 weeks that they still haven't even got all their votes counted for in their primaries. I think that's a #1 issue. And I think to not even question ballot or voting integrity is kind of a silly thing to say. I mean, why should we not be questioning the validity of votes? I think when you have things like 8 states that have more registered
That wasn't my point, though. My point wasn't that we shouldn't ever be questioning validity of votes. My point
you said we shouldn't be talking about it.
I'm saying in this specific conversation about mail-in voting, focusing on voter integrity is sort of missing the point. Yeah, it's very secondary.
But that's the whole point of it, is we're talking about that because we want to have voter integrity. We don't want to have fraudulent votes happening. So I think that's kind of why
we're talking about that while the system for it is being sabotaged.
Do you have evidence of that? Because just because you say that there's some political hack that has taken over the post office doesn't mean that they're actually trying to sabotage the election. I think that's just kind of more of your opinion, and that's fine. But you would kind of have to show evidence of that. I mean,
would showing evidence of a huge mail slowdown be evidence of that?
But hasn't there always been a problem with the post office, even before that Postmaster General had taken the position?
Not compared to now. Not compared to now.
I know, because everybody's at home because of the pandemic, and everybody's increasing their buying of whatever it may be. Whether
but that happened before the slowdown.
Don't come through the U.S. Postal Service.
I mean, from what I looked at, the Postmaster General, he had a pretty big position, like in one of the biggest transportation privatized mail services. So I don't see how he's just some kind of political hack that was installed in there. Yeah, maybe
that's competing interests.
Yeah, but he still has a general understanding of how transportation of mail works.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
He also has a conflict of interest, though.
I mean, I guess so. If you would think that he was trying to take or destroy the post office service, but you would have to show a little bit more evidence than the president, installing him into the position to try to destroy the system. There would have to be some kind of evidence to that claim.
I want to give Daniel one quick response to that, and then we definitely have to move on.
I mean, my quick response is one thing being that if you're asking for evidence, you can look at the extreme slowdown in mail since this person took over, and the steps he has taken, such as making it so workers aren't allowed to work overtime, like postal service workers, which means the mail just keeps piling up and piling up and piling up. And that's not a problem that goes away. If they're not allowed to deal with the extra, then it piles up longer and longer and longer. And what is the end to that? So like that itself is a direct sabotage of the postal service's role, which is delivering mail.
Well, why is that though? I mean, is the post office making money, or is it losing money each year? Is that
It's
why?
not supposed to make money. It's a branch of government. It's not a
Yeah,
company.
it's not a business.
Yeah, it's literally.
I know, but what I'm trying to say is, does the post office is it draining more money than what the government is giving it each year for?
I think there was just bringing one point in here real quick. I think there was a law that was passed a little while back that said specifically that the post office couldn't sell stamps below cost. So
well, and so what's happening there is that Congress sets the prices that the post office is allowed to charge, and the Republicans passed a law that, and Kylan mentioned this, that made it so the post office has to pay pensions for their employees 75 years in advance, which no one else has to do. So they're always at a huge deficit because of that. So if you're going to have that be a law and make it so they can't, so prices are set by Congress, then we can't evaluate them on whether they're operating at a loss or a profit, because again, they're not a company, they're a branch of government, or not a branch, sorry, a facet of government.
Yeah. All right. I think we're gonna end it there. Great discussion, guys. Seriously, really, really interesting to be a spectator to this. So thank you. Want to give a quick shout out to the Red Boys over here, Jake and Jordan, newest members of the Republican Party.
To be fair, I have blue panels, white headphones, and red lights.
I wanted to ask you, Jordan, real quick. How many times have you changed your colors throughout this entire podcast?
4 or 5.
4 times. Okay, that's insane. That's insane.
You're welcome. You're welcome for the entertainment.
I've noticed it. Anyways, so back to business here. Last topic of the night, as always, is the fun topic. And for this fun topic, I want to get a little audience engagement too. So I'm going to prompt everybody here, and I'd love it if not only the panel responds to this question, but if we could get some audience responses too, that would be really cool. Because
your mom will be commenting.
She's not watching right now, which is really sad, but it is what it is.
We should get all of our parents to watch.
My mom loves Amanda, and she says that over and over and over again. So
Dude, my mom's the same. She keeps talking about Amanda.
I'm single. Do you guys have brothers?
Hey, what?
Our moms are interested.
I thought you meant for their moms.
Geez.
No, I said you guys have brothers. No.
Oh, jeez. Oh, my mom is watching. Oh, there she is. She's just coming. Hi, Mom. I love you.
For the Project Shelter in Place dating hour.
Okay, last topic of the night. And again, I'd love to get some audience engagement on this one. So if you have an answer, put it in the comment section. Okay, so we're going to start with Jordan Rittet here. This is the prompt. You're not saving the world. You're not saving anything. What is your useless superpower that you're
I want the ability to create cubed ice on command.
Ooh.
So I can ice any drink that I have in front of me, because you have no idea how much ice I use all the fucking time.
Can you throw it at people?
No, it just appears and drops out of my hand. It doesn't get thrown.
But couldn't you like?
I mean, I could make it appear in my hand and huck it.
Does it dehydrate you to do that?
No, I'd be coalescing it out of the moisture in the air.
Okay, I was gonna say
what's the maximum rate?
That's pretty gross, but
what's the maximum rate?
Yeah, like one
a glass worth in one go.
Like 1 cup.
Yeah, basically. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Just
I love that.
There we go.
That sound effect there, Jake, was legit.
That's the superpower sound.
Yeah, that's totally standard. I don't know what you're talking about, Alex.
Wow. Okay. Amanda, useless superpower.
I have two. One is upon command become one with my couch.
Yes. Yes.
The other one. So like my one vice is popcorn. Like I'm that person, you go to a dinner and a movie and I eat a full dinner and I'm full and then I get the extra large popcorn with layered butter and I don't share and I eat the whole thing and I want to refill. So it would be the ability to just have like, I have a bowl in front of me, popcorn appears and it's never ending.
Oh, okay. So
Yes.
popcorn and
roll
couch.
with that.
I like
I
it.
can't be a superhero. I can feed the masses.
I don't know if that's
It wouldn't
useless.
exactly
Here's
be
your
nutritious,
nutritionless
but-
substance.
Hey, popcorn is low calorie, high in fiber, and it has more polyphenol antioxidants than red berries. You're welcome.
Wow.
Look
Okay.
it
I
up.
did not know that actually.
You're welcome.
Fun
Funny
fact.
and educational.
All right. Let's move on. Robert, useless superpower.
Hopefully that this is a superpower because it's kind of more like a Batman type of thing, and I don't even know if Batman is technically a superhero just because he's got a lot of money. But mine would be
that's
that I would install TV screens into the under part of my eyelids so I could watch
Ooh.
TV and play video games while I sleep.
That is so
Whoa.
I like it.
Okay.
Say it has to be
Like,
super
never
just because it would
sleep, though?
hurt.
Like, would that like keep you awake?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I sleep with the
How can
TV
you
on,
even
but
get into REM sleep with that?
I don't
I
know.
mean, I'd imagine
but
to be able to turn
Dude,
it
the
off.
advertisements would suck.
Or would it be more of like a thing where like you close your eyes and people think you're sleeping, but you can still really see what's happening?
yeah, maybe that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would have to still be maybe like the superpower would be that I could actually sleep while watching the TV screens.
And absorb all the information.
Exactly.
Before,
But then it
uh,
wouldn't be useless because that would be actually a really good superpower. It'd be really
Before
Would
we
it be
go on to the
useless
next,
to anybody else.
I was gonna say before we go on to the next person real quick, I want to read a few of the comments we've gotten. William Adams, turn people into trees so I can be like Don Cheadle and Captain Planet.
Yeah.
That was a great video.
What is
Charles
that used
McConnell,
One of
for?
my favorite videos ever.
Slightly evil Captain Planet.
Charles
Fantastic.
McConnor, Grillmaster superpower. I think you already have that superpower, dude. I've
Yeah,
seen some of
that's
your
cheating.
grilling.
You already have
That's
that.
amazing.
He's just
Um,
flexing on us. He's like, I make good food.
Brian Wells in the chat says, "Get some robot legs while you're at it." Hey, why not, right? I like robot.
What kind of
legs.
robot legs are we talking? Like,
I don't know. I mean, you're to be
Front-
Brian. You're to be a little more
Inspector
specific.
Gadget?
They'd have to be something like pogo sticks.
Are we talking
yeah,
like
you can get,
go-go
like Terminator
gadget
legs?
legs?
Oh, yeah.
Inspector
Go-Go
Gadget.
Gadget legs wins.
Oh, and
That's
we
what I was thinking.
we missed Tyler's here. Tyler Toller in the chat, regular on the podcast, by the way, says knowing the entire U.S. highway system by heart. That's
I
That's
wouldn't say that's
actually
useless
really kinda
though.
useful.
That's super
That's
useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
that's
gonna
pretty
say,
Fun
that
fact, in order to become a cab driver, I think in England, you have to like study for like 4 years and literally learn every single street and every way to get to everywhere without GPS.
I mean, I think
I
as
can
far as it
confirm that
goes,
is true.
That's
as
awesome.
a superpower, you already basically, like anyone who drives basically has that for their immediate area anyway, and you're gonna look it up otherwise. So like, it's not that. I mean, it's super, but it's
But the United
in the day.
I mean, that's also assuming anyone's
Someone's,
driving that
great
much these
uncle in the
days.
50s had that power.
Yeah.
all right. Let's move on. Vlad, useless superpower.
You know, I've given this a lot of thought, and
Okay.
the useless superpower that I would want to have, and I'm doing this strictly to annoy the shit out of Alex, is to be able to conjure a cheesecake out of thin air.
Now, is it the
Glad.
same cheesecake every time, or can
Yeah,
it be
yeah.
like any type of cheesecake that you think?
No, so think of it like the Leprechaun's horde, where there's like a horde of cheesecake somewhere, and he's
No,
pulling them out.
Yep. It's
Wait,
literally.
so you're not making a cheesecake out of thin air. You are transporting a cheesecake.
Nope, you're conjuring it out of thin air.
You're conjuring it out of thin air. Okay, I thought you
Just
said like there's like a horde of
imagine-
cheesecake somewhere.
Imagine that
He's
the palm
gone.
of my
All
hand.
magic has a price, so I didn't know if it was coming from somewhere else.
Imagine that the palm of my hand is like the replicator on a starship in Star Trek.
Please, sir, may I have some more? Wrong reference.
Just imagine that, and that's what I would want. And
Alex
now
has left the scene.
Alex
Alex
has
just ditched.
officially quit the podcast.
All right,
Rude.
Daniel.
Who's next?
Cool.
Who hasn't gone
Daniel,
yet?
what you got?
Okay, I would want the power to know who had a crush on me only after they had like left my life forever.
Or what if like only after they stop liking you?
Yeah, exactly.
That
So I
happened
can just
to my
like
best friend in middle school.
yeah,
Like,
see
after
that's
I stopped liking
perfect.
her, she found out.
So that I can like wake up right before I'm falling asleep and like
Oh,
feel
no.
shame for the rest of my life.
I don't know if
George,
that's
I
useless
feel
so
like
much
I
as just
have that.
self like masochistic, you know?
That just sounds like a
You're
heartbreaking
into that sort of
superpower.
thing.
Wait.
I mean, if that's what floats your boat.
So anyway,
Well-
cheesecakes.
Jesus
Hey.
Christ.
I thought walking off the podcast wasn't cool.
Hey,
Right,
Jules.
I'm breaking my own rule.
Jules, you got any
Uh,
superpower ideas?
Yeah, I got two actually. The first would be to at will be able to transform into a 89-year-old Turkish woman with mild incontinence.
I love this.
What?
I love this.
I feel like a
Art-
truly creative mind could find a use for that.
Oh no, I love this.
You have to work
So
hard.
good.
And the second one is to believe, to truly believe that it is butter.
Oh.
Took like a full
That
second
is
to
a
register.
really good one.
It's so gross though.
No, this is butter.
It's just,
The
It's
power to
just
believe
vegetable
that it
oil.
is
You'll be
butter.
fine.
It's like hydrogen in vegetable oil. It's shitty, but what
Oh
if I
my
could
God.
believe it was butter? I would never need to buy butter again.
I think we had an
Save me
Facebook
like
comment.
a dollar or two.
Is
maybe.
this like the
did.
Matrix where you just want to believe that it's actually chicken you're eating, or
Right, exactly.
Yes,
What,
basically.
one more. This is a good one. Good Facebook comment. William Adams with, I would want the ability to open my hand and have it sound like a screaming cat before it starts a fight with another cat. Use this power for every fucking Karen I ran into, so it cancels out their voice. Wow.
We got one more.
Unbelievable.
Oh my god.
That would be so
Can't-
amazing. That would be so useful, though.
That's
That's
so
not
good.
useful at all.
I think we have a winner.
Yeah,
That's a
So,
wildly
yeah,
specific
method.
Yeah, I'm gonna give that one the
it's
winner.
wildly
I'm with
specific and
Vlad.
it's wildly useful for one specific incident.
So
Let's
Hannah-
let's go. Oh
Hannah-
wait, we got
Hannah has a
another one from
Hannah has
our comment moderator of the night, and thank you for the great job you've done tonight, Hannah. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Excellent job. Hannah would like to grow her nails extra long as a useless superpower. Okay, I bite my nails all the time because
Still having to cut them.
What's
They
that?
don't automatically cut. They'll grow crazy long, but you got to trim them yourself.
I hate trimming my nails.
All right. Hey, Kylan. I'd love to hear your superpower idea.
Let's
Useless
hear it,
Yeah.
Colin.
Okay,
No, I am.
am I super laggy right now?
Yes.
Kind of,
Just a
but
little bit.
we'll get the gist of it.
We'll get it.
I'm gonna type in.
Here, I'll speak for him.
He's gonna type it. Okay, and then Daniel will transcribe it.
Has anybody else not gone yet?
I haven't.
Jake hasn't gone yet.
So so Kylan's power would be the ability to turn any phrase into a sexual innuendo. So like even talking about cheesecake can be like making love.
Wow.
Turn
Wow.
any
Dude.
phrase
that was
into-
I think you're
Daniel, but it didn't. Kylan's ability
you're right.
takes the cake there.
I can't do it.
I'm just
I
gonna
don't
say, I
I
don't
like
think
the
that's a
pun,
useless
Amanda.
superpower he would want. I'm pretty sure it's a useless
Look at-
superpower he already has.
Yeah, same. very, very much so. He's down there smiling.
Well, like Hannah's was basically a confession as well. So
Yeah.
God.
Thank you, Kylan.
Last
Sexy
one.
man.
Jake,
Useless superpower. Lots riding on this, man. What do you got?
Okay, so it functions almost exactly like the Spider-Man Spidey sense, like blaring, intense, almost like noise kind of thing. For warning for something bad that's going to happen, something that's going to hit you, you're going to fall down, whatever. But it's just a few seconds too late, no matter what. So if something hits you in the head, 10 seconds later, warning, really loud, really annoying, like can't make it stop. So middle of dealing with the problem and alarms.
Wow.
That's extra useless.
That would suck if you got hit by a car and then hear it. Yeah.
I like it.
Jeez.
Good one.
Be masochistic.
Do we have any others from the audience before we
Alex, did you go?
That is it actually. The last one is me.
Tyler.
And my useless superpower would be to keep all of you motherfuckers from ever talking about cheesecake in my presence ever again. How about
Well,
that?
you're right, that
Useful,
would be-
I don't know.
Preclude us from sending you messages about it, writing you letters, snail mail, like
Any
Sending
sort
you
of
cakes.
any sort of communication you can fathom with regards to cheesecake is just evaporated.
now,
You realize what I'm getting
does
for
it
Christmas
cut
now,
out
right?
direct communication, like, can I tell Jasmine about it? And then she happens to tell you.
Indirect communication. This still counts. Sorry.
What about like
What if it's not
drawn
intentional?
pictures that you happen to see?
Let's just say, for the sake of it, everything. Like
Is
any
this-
mention of cheesecake coming in my
Okay.
general direction
So
is just
This
evaporated.
isn't
It's
for
It's
just
just
Alex.
thin
This
air.
is for everyone else. I made a really good cheesecake for the first time the other day. Don't listen, Alex. This isn't for you. Hannah
Before you go
was
into that date,
so good at every step in the kitchen and kept me from like rushing around and getting ahead of myself. And we turned out the most delicious cheesecake. And I thought it was gonna be hard, but Vlad's recipe was super, super good and really awesome to do.
I
Had a lot of
still
fun.
haven't used it yet. I'm really,
really-
really excited to
Give
use
it a
it.
try. It was honestly, I was kind of expecting it to be as hard as other baking, and it was just smooth and creamy and sweet, just like Alex likes it.
Does he
so
though?
Alex, with your superpower, does that
Yes, he
mean that
does.
the Cheesecake Factory chain ceases to exist?
Yeah, how do they welcome to can I take your order?
No, they just become the factory.
The
factory. Oh,
Sorry,
God.
can you
You go
can you
inside and there's just like an empty case, dessert case.
Mm-hmm.
Going to a
Yeah,
restaurant called the
yeah,
Factory
so
sounds pretty ominous.
every time that I go to the
eating
Cheesecake
off of
Factory,
Empty
half
plates.
of their stock just evaporates just into thin air. That's what happens.
Do they get profit for that?
No.
No?
Anyways,
Oof.
we got to end it
That
right there,
hurts.
guys. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We had over 120 comments on the podcast
Hey.
tonight. That's a new record.
Fire.
Thank you guys so much for being a part of this and having a conversation with us tonight. It's been awesome. And we will see you guys in 2 weeks for the next one. Thanks again. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.